Welcome to everyone who's joining the webinar, both on Zoom and LinkedIn. We're live streaming. If you're on Zoom, you can use the caption setting to enable automated translated captions for the webinar. And you can also share information about yourself in chat. Please say hello, say your name, where you are, and where you work. And we will get started with the webinar in just a second. We have over 109 people so far. People are still coming in. Hello, everyone. It's great to see you all here today. My name is Josh Lerner. I'm the co-executive director of People Powered. I'm normally based in New York, but today I'm in Brussels, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today. I'm really excited about this discussion. We have a bunch of great speakers who are doing really innovative work that we'll be sharing with you and having a good deep dive discussion into what it looks like to connect different democratic practices into stronger ecosystems. So we will get started. Again, just if you just joined, please enable captions if you're using Zoom. If you'd like to have translated captions, and say hello in the chat. We're really glad to have you all here. And Ryan, if you could move the slides forward. So for today, our goals, we want to learn together how to better mix different democratic practices in order to build stronger democratic ecosystems. You also will learn about support that can help you run a participatory program that's using diverse methods. We hope that you'll be inspired to take action and to put these ideas into practice to plan and support more innovative democratic practices. We'll have some short welcome and introductions to the topic, and then we'll do very quick presentations from 3 different speakers about some of the most exciting and innovative work around mixing different democratic practices. We'll have a discussion, and then we'll talk about how you can get support to put these ideas into practice together. Before we get started with that, just a quick introduction to People Powered. If you haven't interacted with us before, we're a global hub for participatory democracy, and I'm Josh Lerner, co-executive director of People Powered. And I'm so excited to have you all on the webinar today. Next. Our mission is to expand people's power to make government decisions. So expanding democracy beyond election in all of its diverse and beautiful forms. And the way that we do that is by supporting organizations and governments that are building participatory democracy around the world. So we're like a global union for participatory democracy workers. If you're working on participatory democracy, People Powered is your community. We want to work with you. And the way we work, so we do a couple main things. One is that we provide global support to help governments transition to more participatory democracy and to make that process easier, connecting you with the resources, mentorship, training, and other support that you need if you're a government worker or if you're in civil society. And the way we do this is from below. We're the global community of practice. So we're a membership-based organization. And our members are the organizations and advocates and practitioners who are working on participatory democracy around the world. They're the ones who provide support through us, build our resources. So if you're interested in being part of this community, I encourage you all to sign up and join as a member. So for today, we have 5 speakers, including myself. We'll, in a few minutes, get started with some presentations and sharing experiences from Stefan Roch from the Bertelsmann Foundation, Marcella Nery from Delibera Brasil, and Kesi Foster from Partners for Dignity and Rights, sharing some of the most innovative work around mixing democratic methods. I'll give some framing remarks before that, and then at the end, my colleague Amanda Luce will share how you can get support to put these ideas into action in your community. So first, I want to start out just setting some framing, and obviously a lot of us have been talking about elections, the US election, but also many other elections. This has been called the year of elections. Half of the world's population has been voting in elections this year. And I think we can ask now, are they delivering the kind of democracy that we need? And what else do we need to have a real, authentic democracy in which people can govern? Next. This discussion builds on that and a white paper that I published earlier this year called From Waves to Ecosystems, the Next Stage of Democratic Innovation, looking at kind of the broader picture of democracy over the course of history. what are different ways that we have practiced democracy and what are different ways that we can practice it in ways that are stronger, more resilient. Next. And essentially, I'm proposing a transition from thinking about democracy in terms of separate waves, which is how we've been doing it over the course of history, and in a much more diverse and longer way than we typically think of it. We think of democracy as this very static thing, but it's looked radically different over the course of human history, going back to 4000 BC, when you had ancient representative democracy, assemblies in ancient Mesopotamia, to ancient Athens, which actually for them, democracy was not voting. Democracy was a solution to the problems of voting and the problem of voting and elections just resulting in charismatic populists. And so they used a lot of direct democracy and also sortition, random selection, and deliberative approaches. Then we see this big wave of modern electoral democracy that's really relatively recent, just in the past couple centuries. And then also a resurgence of modern direct democracy and participation and deliberative democracy. But often these are still separate waves. Next slide. So what we're trying to do at People Powered, and a lot of people in this space, is connect those different approaches into stronger ecosystems of democracy, going beyond separate waves and thinking about what's the strong, resilient ecosystem that we need to enable the people to govern. And that in practice, that requires different approaches for different kinds of issues and different contexts. Next. So in my white paper, I talk about several ways that we can build these ecosystems. Today, we're going to focus on just the first one here, building bridges. So how can we experiment with new ways to combine or mix different democratic practices? Next. So that said, we're going to get into 3 concrete examples of what this looks like on the ground of mixing different democratic practices. And the first, I'm going to bring on Stefan Roch from the Bertelsmann Foundation. And we are going to learn a bit about a process in Germany, which is very fascinating, that connected a citizens assembly with the broader online public engagement process. So Stefan, do you want to explain how that works and what did you learn?
I certainly would like to. Yeah. Thanks, Josh, for having me, and thanks all for listening. Very excited to present our little big, well, actually quite big project here in this forum. So before we go into it, I just want to talk quickly about, why did we do the forum against fakes? You'll later learn what it's all about. So, the project is roughly rooted in kind of more than a decade of citizen participation experience that the Bertelsmann Stiftung has. So in like 2011, we've already done a big citizens forum in Germany, which already had kind of an online component. And from 2018 onwards, we ran several citizens assemblies at the European level as well as the national level, including direct translation, so people could speak in their native language in a cross-European setting, and also taking a full citizens assembly kind of online and doing that also with simultaneous translation online during COVID. So after we did that for our new project, then 2 years ago, we started to reconsider. We figured we had kind of stretched the idea of the classical citizens assembly approach quite far, from fully online, fully multilingual, and so forth. But what we observed for all the processes was that assemblies ran pretty attached from public debates when we did them and when also other people were doing them. And so what we saw with this is that that's the limit basically of the impacts assemblies can have the way we saw it. It makes it difficult really to attract public attention, to really join a public debate, as for many of these things, the media really wasn't particularly interested, and also the wider public wasn't interested because we didn't have a stake in the process. So we tried to come up with a different process. That was basically our point of departure, asking how can we integrate the model of the citizens assembly better into wider public discussion, a wider public debate about pertinent issues. And that's how we came up with the Forum Against Fakes. Next slide, please. And luckily for that, we got the Ministry of Interior on board, who are also looking for kind of participation approach to create a public debate around the issue of how to govern the issue of spreading disinformation in Germany, and particularly online. That's how we kind of then developed this project, the Forum Against Fakes, which the aim was to initiate a debate across Germany on how to deal with disinformation using unique participatory format. And we implemented that project from January this year, basically until September. And just, you see here on the right, so just quickly want to go through the kind of the different steps we've been taking here. And I can only scratch on that because it's quite an intricate model. So the model we then kind of developed builds on the premise that online participation comes in at several points of intervention as to the standard assembly process. So it wasn't kind of a continuous online community. It was different online interventions. And the first intervention, as you see on the bottom left, already took place right at the beginning before the assembly, where we asked people in a polis kind of setup to give their ideas on what Germany should do about disinformation. So they were able to give sort of tweet-like comments and then also vote up and down, thumbs up, thumbs down, to the comments of others. Then we condensed that input and we fed into the beginning of the assembly, and this kind of became the agenda setter of the Citizens Assembly. Then the assembly started working and started developing its own ideas. And five of those initial ideas, the ones that were most pertinent to the assembly, were then fed back into the online community. And they received comments and suggestions from the online community. And again, these suggestions and comments, then they were put together by us. They were aggregated, fed back into the assembly, and then out of that were created final recommendations. And with these final recommendations, the assembly also created 28 very concrete measures, which they want to see changed. And then at the end of the assembly, we fed those measures back into the online community to give people a say kind of which measures they think is most important, which measure they agree to, again, with a kind of up-down voting that many of you will know from the Polis platform. And that then all fed into a citizens report, which we then handed over to the Ministry of the Interior. And next slide, please. So that's the whole process in a nutshell, but obviously I can go a bit further when we discuss. So here's some numbers. What did we reach? So we reached we got about more than 3,000 comments and proposals from citizens online. We had more than 400,000 participations, which is quite a considerable amount, even as it was only in Germany. And then the assembly was a very standard assembly, 120 randomly selected citizens from all over Germany, 9 full working days, with these 15 recommendations and 28 concrete measures. Now, as you see on the right side, we certainly wouldn't have reached those numbers online without considerable outreach efforts. So we had, for example, public ad campaigns, as you see in the bottom, that's in the metro of Bielefeld, where we had public campaigns where people could see, we asked the citizens to participate. We also had online campaigns, social media, and most important, what we had a media partnership with T-Online, which is kind of the widest read non-tabloid online news source in Germany that included in considerable amounts of their articles, widgets of our participation where people or readers could directly interact with the online community, directly give their votes, give their comments, kind of while reading articles on T-Online. And then next slide, please. The project then formally finished with the handover of the citizen report with all recommendations to the Ministry of the Interior. Nancy Faeser, for you from the US, it's not Nancy Fraser, who's a famous social scientist. That's our Interior Minister. People tend to mix that up. But that was a great thing, and people developed 15 recommendations. I don't want to go through all of them. I just want to show you a selected number over on the left. So ensuring media literacy becomes embedded in education law, increasing civic responsibility through enhancing transparency in media and requiring social media platforms to effectively combat disinformation. So a whole big bunch of recommendations, and particularly as we handed over the report and as the thing became public, we got an overwhelming amount of response from the public. And as you know, we're all netizens, we're all online citizens, for the good and for the bad. So a lot of support, a lot of critical engagement, but also a lot of, well, we can say it bluntly, bullshit, and a lot of very, very aggressive commentary. And that's, I think, at the point where we are right now. We're kind of reassessing kind of what's the feedback we got, how do we contribute to that public debate, because we certainly did contribute to it. And we could really see that once we came out, the public debate really got reignited. But there were quite a lot of learnings from that there. But I think I've already overstayed my time. So this is the learning speed is something we can talk about later in the discussion. Thank you, guys.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Stefan. And yeah, we'll come back to discuss the learning in a bit. But first, another presentation. And if you can, Brian, next slide. And so we heard from Stefan about how online tools help to engage more people with a Citizens Assembly. And so this mixing of the in-person Citizens Assembly with online participation. In the next example that we're going to share in Bujaru, Brazil, there's a different approach that Marcella Nery will speak about of instead tapping into people's lived experiences and emotions more using legislative theater and mixing that with the Citizens Assembly. So Marcella, can you tell us a bit more about how that worked?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Josh. It's a pleasure for me to be here representing the Delibera Brasil team and all the incredible citizens who make this initiative so successful. So before I answer your question, let me briefly describe the problems we face in Bujaru. Next slide, please. As many of you know, the Amazon biome is critically in danger. So its preservation is essential, not only for Brazil climate politics, but also for the stability of the global climate. So in Bujaru, despite being the fourth largest açaí producer region in Brazil, the city is among of the 10 municipalities most in need of federal support to cover basic expenses. So the disparity highlights a complex issue: how to foster economic growth in Bujaru and its communities, while preserving the environment by avoiding monoculture and addressing the scarcity of jobs in traditional communities and among young people. This was what our Citizen Assembly held from March to June this year, focus on, and this is where the challenges that we had in our sessions. We just conclude our Citizen Assembly, and our focus right now has shifted to mobilizing the resources and strategies needed to implement these recommendations. So the Assembly's recommendations included the introduction, for example, of a municipal agriculture and bioeconomy plan. However, Bujaru faces a lack of financial and personal resources within the local government, and many of the relevant recommendations fall within the competencies of the state and federal levels in Brazil. So it kind of complicates the implementation process. So going to the legislative theater slide, given the Bujaru community's high level of involvement around cultural life and traditions, we thought that an innovative approach to support these advocacy efforts right now would be something interesting would be the legislative theater. We applied for additional funding from People Power's Climate Democracy Accelerator program, since we were one of the organizations selected in the last cohort, because we felt that the Citizen Assembly recommendations were not an end itself, but a starting point, and we needed support for the advocacy phase. So briefly, next slide, please. Legislative theater. It is a methodology inspired by Brazil Theater of the Oppressed and took root in the streets and the council chambers of Rio de Janeiro in the 90s. So basically, it consists of stages where community members watch a play based on lived experiences, and they can intervene to test solutions, to propose policy changes. They can deliberate with policymakers, vote on emerging proposals, and they collectively can commit to action. In our case, we are thinking the legislative theater can offer a powerful advocacy tool. Next slide, please. So more than just presenting problems and proposals, it helps us to land the Assembly's recommendations. We intend to take this format to Bujaru's schools, involving young people and to draw up some action plans based on the Citizens Assembly recommendations. So we want to go deeper and make the Assembly's recommendations tangible, since the government itself cannot do it right now because they they are facing some lack of capacity and financial resources. So we're gonna use this legislative theater not just like one participatory process after a citizen assembly. We want to use it as a critical step forward to the citizen assembly. And yeah, we really want to avoid the risk of repeating what has already been done with the citizen assembly. And this would be, as we don't want to waste our resources, and we don't want to make the citizens lose their trust and in participatory processes, for example. So for us, repeating this kind of process is not an option. We want to make them really connected, and the legislative theater go further than the citizen assembly did. So to finalize, another important point is that the original legislative theater was organized by the city council. In our case, Delibera Brasil is a civil organization. We are working very close with the public authorities to encourage them to realizing the Assembly's action plan. But in towns like Bujaru, with limited resources but a significant economic and environmental role, party political disputes can be quite complex, and we don't underestimate the complexity of getting all the players out at the same table. And with the legislative theater, we believe that all the stakeholders can be in the same table, because it's not a conversation behind closed doors, but a commitment of the citizenship that we believe is difficult to deny as a public authority. So we don't have many answers ready yet, but to conclude, I'll leave you with the question that we've been asking for the last 3 months for ourselves. What does the citizen assembly bring that the legislative theater doesn't, and vice versa? So in our case, for now, we understand that the legislative theater is an advocacy opportunity that complements, goes beyond, lends, and helps the government to make the assembly's recommendation possible. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marcella. And yeah, I love how you're bringing some of the kind of real politics into this as well, which we'll talk about in a bit. And you can have the best deliberative process, but it doesn't mean that you're going to see change on the ground unless you actually bring it to people and engage them in it. So it sounds like legislative theater is a way to make that real and to really connect the deliberations with people's experiences and ways that lead to action. So we'll go to our last example now, which is a bit different, but also very exciting. Partly it's from my home country in the US. And this is getting more into the issue of social movements. Another dynamic that we've seen is that we have a lot of these citizens assemblies or civic assemblies that are very disconnected from social movements. At the same time, social movements are having their own assemblies. And we're going to talk now about what those different approaches can learn from each other. So stepping back more broadly around assemblies and what are different kinds of assemblies. Partners for Dignity and Rights, which is a people-powered member, has been doing some fantastic new research and developing tools on this, which they will also share. And Kesi Foster is going to share, for now, some of that work and some of the learning from it.
Thank you, Josh. And I just want to preface, I have a lot of, after Tuesday here in the US, I have a lot of questions for myself that I'm processing. But as we've kind of looked at citizens assemblies growing in Europe and Latin America and across the world, we've seen them come to the US as well. And as Josh mentioned, we also here have a history of people's movement assemblies, which are really deeply tied and connected to social movements particularly in the US South, right? And I think through the 20th century, a lot of democracy expanding in the US and being more exclusive really was tied to kind of bottom-up social movements through people who were marginalized and excluded. And so what we've been thinking about is how can we learn from sortition and deliberative and direct democracy as well as social movements and bring those learning together. And so today we're releasing a white paper which starts to kind of analyze those approaches and how we can kind of pull elements from each approach to support kind of building participatory democracy from the bottom up. So we will begin by kind of looking at people's movement assemblies and the kind of use of people power to build democracy. And so assemblies have, demonstrated tremendous promise to be significantly scaled up in both government and movement organizing. And our report helps to provide guidance on how to strengthen assemblies' impact and political durability by deepening their integration into both governance processes and social movement building, with a particular intention on equitable power building, right? Like, we deeply believe democracy is contested and creates a lot of contested spaces, particularly locally. Next slide, please. People's movement assemblies, which I mentioned, have been happening through the South and globally for decades now. The elements of people's movement assemblies that may look different from citizens assemblies is that they are anchored by community organizations with a clear political analysis. They're organized to bring people together from frontline or most impacted communities to build a shared analysis and activate people towards collective action. And then they pay special attention to local conditions, which includes culture, leadership, and relationships of power. And they really create or try to eliminate barriers for people to participate. And so that means these are assemblies that have childcare for people. These are assemblies that bring people with disabilities to the assembly. They really do what they can to incorporate and bring as many marginalized people to the center as possible. Next slide, please. One, which is from a previous report we did that we'll look at, which I think speaks to durability, are Jackson's People's Assemblies, which were brought to Jackson, which is a predominantly a majority Black community in Mississippi, by the Malcolm X grassroots movement over a decade ago. Next slide. Through the assembly process, the People's Movement Assemblies in Jackson years ago looked at some of the challenges that the city was facing, and particularly challenges to its infrastructure. And through assemblies, they came up with passing a 1% city sales tax to raise public funds to help kickstart improvements to the public infrastructure. And then the government brought that to a referendum vote, which yielded overwhelming support, with 90% of voters agreeing to the sales tax increase. Unfortunately, as we think of democracy as a contested space, it is a city within a state in which the state officials actually never really let the municipality utilize the funds from that sales tax for how they intended. So some decade later, they're actually facing a huge water crisis in Jackson because the funds that were needed were never directed as people had hoped they would, and that they came together through the assembly to direct. Even with that challenge, over a decade later, Jackson continues to organize people's assemblies. And one of the recent people's assemblies actually was able to redirect public funding to come up with a new public safety office that would address issues of crime, particularly among young people, in more holistic ways and less kind of carceral ways. And so we really want to point that even though it may have not resulted in what people hoped for, they're continuing to use assemblies in Jackson as a way to affect change and really bring people into organized relationship outside of elections with democracy, which we think is critical, particularly during this time. I think that is it for me.
Great. Actually, do you want to put that?
Sorry.
The next slide up, I think, has the picture of the new white paper that's coming up. That's out, right?
Yes. Yep. And I think we have a link for the white paper we can share with everybody.
Great. I've seen a preview of it. It's really fascinating stuff that is different from other writing that I've seen on citizens' assemblies and deliberative democracy, and also on social movements. Does a really great job of bridging that. So I really encourage everyone to check that out. And I love the example of Jackson, what it shows too, is that if our goal is not just to have a good process, but actually to achieve real change in people's lives, we need to think more broadly. And so this approach of having a people's movement assembly maybe didn't look like the ideal deliberative democratic process, but if it helps people have water, then that's a good process. So thinking about the ends, not just trying to optimize the quality of the process, but also having real outcomes in people's lives. So we're going to dive into discussion now. And I want to start out with probably the biggest elephant in the room of politics and the rise of far right anti-democratic parties. And let me just say, so we'd love to hear from folks, and maybe starting with Stefan, actually, because I think Germany, the experience there has been really fascinating. How does politics interact or intersect with these processes? And what role can mixing different approaches and combining different approaches of democracy play in contesting the rise of anti-democratic far-right movements? How do we engage people who are kind of finding more appeal in those movements and have productive discussions? So maybe starting with Germany, what have you been learning so far?
Well, one of the principles that we have at the Stiftung when we do such projects is that we always do it with a political partner. So you have to have some, agency or ministry on board that will assure that what we do is having an impact. And I mean, as I said, the problem that we had is that with previous assemblies is that even if you have random selection, you still have a very, very closed space of environment. You're never really getting the full public discussion. And even in that closed space, the assembly itself gets kind of its own initiative, its own kind of narrative. And usually what we see is that the politics that come out are relatively liberal and are sort of often in contrast to the public debate. So we kind of wanted to challenge that, because you also see you have an impact by what kind of experts you bring in, how experts talk about certain things. And particularly when you think about disinformation, for example, it's difficult to have an expert really who's very much on the right there than the liberal ones. So opening it up was incredibly crucial for us. And the feedback that the assembly got was very, very harsh at times, very, very kind of, you can't do that, this is illegal, freedom of speech, all these kind of things, which, in Germany, I think we have another interpretation of. In the US, it's a bit more, slightly more restricted than in the US, although it's still very much open. But that in itself is, I think, incredibly important to help it, that you don't create fully closed spaces, but that you always open up the space. And I think particularly when you run an assembly, it's very important also to have some sort of political legitimacy to open up, because also in Germany, the criticism often is, well, it was only 120 people, why should we listen to it? We are the parliament, we're elected by 80 million. But then if you open it up to public debate and say, well, actually, the whole citizenry and the critical amount of people, which is 400,000, roughly 0.5% of the German population, although, I mean, it wasn't all of them, but a critical amount of people actually had an impact, then, you have it's much, much bigger. And then also you have the thing of a public conversation. And as I said, what we had was that we've got a lot of very, very kind of critical feedback. And I think the problem often is with assemblies is that we have this kind of initial assumption that when you have 120 randomly selected people and you have a very sophisticated process, you will produce something like a Pareto kind of optimal solutions that will kind of present the kind of, that will be representative and that represent the kind of the idea of the wider population. But I think that is a bit of a far-fetched view, particularly if we look at the way politics is now, the way opinions are split. So now really getting that feedback and seeing that people increasingly engage with it, and also seeing that the outcome of an assembly is not necessarily something that's superior to any other recommendation. At the end, it's just really like political recommendations, like any other thing. That's very interesting. But I think I'll stop it here, because that's exactly the question that we're also kind of grappling with now. And we're really thinking of how do we develop that further, and what do we do with all that huge amount of feedback that we got? We're not quite sure of that yet, I have to admit.
Great. Marcella, do you want to speak to this as well, and also about the role of what is it like working with government in this context, and politicians and governments, but also using these different approaches? How do you navigate the politics of that?
Yes, I would say like in the Bujaru's case, we had when we first came there were like mistrust environment in every single conversation that we had with politicians and even with the citizens. So for us, it was crucial to go in every part of the municipality to talk to people, to talk to communities, and to make a different strategy to recruit traditional communities. So we develop our own methodology to recruit indigenous communities, riverside communities, ethnic groups in the Amazon forest, for them to feel that they can participate. Because one of the reasons for populism, for example, is the feeling that you don't have the voice, you cannot participate in public decisions. So we did an extra effort to recruit these people, recruit these communities, like for them to feel a little bit more included in the process. In the other hand, like with the government itself, in Bujaru, we cannot say that it is the most progressive city in the Brazil, for example, but we could like present the proposal, and like the Secretary of Agriculture over there, who was the person who has an idea to make a citizen assembly. We could present the proposal for the mayor and for the senators and deputies in a framework that makes sense for them to engage in the proposal. So like we framed the problem in a way that they can gain political capital if they join the problem. So we kind of did that for them, like to be in the boat with us, and for us to not be to present something that sounds really leftist or something that is not aligned to their government. So we present the problem of preservation, sustainability, and political and economic growth in a way that they can also gain political capital as well, like join the effort. So yeah, that's it.
It sounds like too that's because if you use different methods, it kind of decenters the perspective of like someone advocating for a particular process. And it's opens it up a bit more. I can imagine for some of the politicians could being that flexibility could sound nice. Like there's different ways for me to get something out of this as opposed to just someone coming in, they want to do their thing. That could generate some defensiveness, I would imagine, as well. Uh, Kesi, I mean, if you're talking about politics, people's movement assemblies start from a very different place from kind of citizens' assemblies as they're practiced in a lot of places around the world. That they are explicitly political in many respects. They come in with a political analysis. What do you see as like the advantages and disadvantages of that? It's like what can we learn from that approach of bringing politics in more directly into this? Um, and how do you think that some of that could be integrated into other kinds of assemblies?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think some of the advantages right away is, there are forces that are pushing on our democracy. There are corporate forces that are pushing on our democracy. There are forces, as we see, are very clear, that would like to pull us into illiberal democracies, right? There are kind of right-wing forces. However you want to define these forces, there are many forces that are pushing on our democracy. And I think people's movement assemblies acknowledge that you need a counterforce in some ways to really shift and transform democracy. And so I think that is one of the advantages that you get, that it is building kind of organized relationship with community members and governing both within communities. So it's building organized relationship between people coming to the assemblies and potentially with government. But it is not always direct or deliberative. And so people's movement assemblies in of themselves are not necessarily going to result in governing changes, right? Like there's not always this clear expectation that what comes out of a people's movement assembly will be adopted by government. The challenge after many assemblies is how do you take that energy from community organizations, whether they be kind of labor or other grassroots community organizations, and then translate that into governance. And, that's really challenging. And when we look at kind of sortition and deliberative processes, when you're starting with the expectation that that government is really going to wrestle with the recommendations and solutions, you're starting from a place which is more collaborative with government, which you need if you want to see the equitable outcomes that you're hoping for.
Definitely. Another element, I should mention, a lot of these questions are coming from you. So we looked at your questions you submitted in advance. That's been really helpful for shaping this discussion. We're not getting to all of them. I know there's comments in the chat as well. If we can share the chat discussion, I think we should be able to share that back out. We'll certainly share the recording and to report back on this. And this is part of an ongoing discussion that extends beyond this event. One of the questions that we got as well was how kind of digital democracy platforms and digital tools can be useful for connecting different democratic processes. And so love to hear your thoughts on that as well. What's the role of digital technology? What are some of the things that it offers and provides? What are some of the challenges or risks of that as we're looking to engage different people in different ways? Forum Against Fakes has done the most on that of the examples here. So maybe, Stefan, if you want to start again, but we'd love to hear also the thoughts from Kesi and Marcella.
Yeah, I think something we've seen particularly also in the foundation is that, when it comes to participation, there's often this kind of bias towards the in-person, right? And that this is kind of the gold standard. And this is something it's certainly true, having a conversation in the face-to-face is certainly, still the gold standard of participation. But as we saw also here, in order to have an impact, you need to reach a critical amount of people. So that's the fundamental reason why we went for integrating a digital platform into an approach like a citizens assembly. And I think there, what we've done, and I can only always talk from our perspective, is certainly an experiment. It's not the end quite yet, because as we saw, what we've done is quite a demanding thing, where an assembly is a very, very complicated kind of approach, very resource demanding, and also the kind of outreach we did was kind of resource demanding. But I think something you can do is to experiment certainly with other also offline forms, like I think Nesta has been developing what they call the strategy room, or kind of the deliberative polling, certain things like that. I think there are several ways, but in order to get that outreach, obviously, online platforms are kind of fundamental. And I can come back to certain parts later.
Great. Marcella or Kesi, you want to add?
I don't have anything more to add there.
Okay.
Briefly, we didn't have like any digital participatory process in the Bujaru case, but we use a lot of WhatsApp group chats to unite people, to ask them some questions like between the sessions. And it is like the most important tool for us right now because, yeah, as I said, Bujaru is really big and there's a lot of different rural areas, and we cannot like do a citizen assembly without the WhatsApp support. So it is what makes people like still engaged in our next steps. So
I think if I can add something that just came up also, thinking about the legitimacy of our process, just the idea that when you have an assembly that people could have participated, when you tell them, you could have had an impact, even if you were not selected randomly, that's also a huge thing when you're communicating a process, particularly also to politics. And it gives you then other ways actually of pushing for change, pushing for the recommendations that, even an analog process has produced. So there's quite some power just behind the narrative of using a digital platform.
Definitely. So I have one more question, and I want to then get to how to put these ideas into action. So we'll be coming to that soon. So please stay on the line, and Amanda will share some really concrete ways that you can take action. One last question, though, for all of you. So one of the challenges for this work that I also wrote about in the white paper is that people are often very rigid, and they're stuck with kind of the approach they've been doing. It's hard to get people to shift beyond that, to try different approaches or to mix different methods. And I'm curious how to overcome that. And I'm curious to hear from you, what have you seen effective for getting people to kind of open up their imagination of how else they could do participation? Or even from you individually, like if there are aha moments where you realized, oh, we could do things a bit differently. And how do we open up people's minds and imagination so they can do things like you are doing? If anyone wants to volunteer to start on that. Kesi, I see you smiling.
Yeah, I can jump in. Like I said, a lot of our work has been grounded in social movements, and from a US, here, social movements are anchored often by community organizations. And what we've found is the way to create space for people to ask questions about their approaches, to think about how to change their approaches is very similar, I think, to what People Powered is doing, is that you create spaces across organizations for them to learn together, for them to feel comfortable questioning their approaches, for them to look across the room and see people who have been trying things maybe a little bit differently, and understanding that no one has all the right answers. But the more we're able to come together and create spaces where we can learn from each other, I think the more that we'll see some of that rigidness start to melt away.
Great. Maybe Stefan, do you want to go next quickly?
I think if that question is directed to the participation community, I think one thing that already obviously has an impact is the reality that we're seeing in politics with populists coming to power and all of that, which already gives inertia to change things, and also our supposed liberal understanding of the world that things are never thought out, that we always have to kind of push further to develop new approaches. And something where I have been thinking is that particularly in Germany, when it comes to assemblies, we often have thought of assemblies, basically as output machines, to put it kind of a bit too extreme here. In a way that we communicate them in a way that they produce great politics, great outcomes, outcomes that are shared by everybody, that are representative. But if you look at them, they're actually still always contested. And then I think what at least in my thinking, I'm moving more now towards in terms of thinking is how we create conversations, how we enable conversations between people. And that was, why we shifted from a standard assembly to something where we wanted to tap into a discussion, into a big public discussion. And as you said, maybe come with some private examples. Is something that I always think of is, I'm having a similar experience of a citizen assembly when I go to like a board gaming group in my local board game shop, which is a small town in Gütersloh, where I meet people that usually I wouldn't talk to on the street, And the thing is, I've asked myself, why is that I have that similar experience? And I figured the one thing that they share is that both are deliberative. I'm hardly deliberative when I'm playing a board game, but that they give a structured space in which we all can agree to some very common rules. And then through that, actually, we can have conversations that we normally couldn't have had. And I think that's something where, although that sounds a bit abstract, I think that's where we have to move to to think about where can we, at really, really different levels, online and offline, create those kind of structured spaces where people feel free to, give their opinion, not feel excluded, not feel that because they have an opinion of that side or that side, they can't participate, but that they feel that it's sort of safe to talk here. And that's kind of where my thinking is at right now.
Great. Marcella, briefly, thoughts?
Yeah, I think for us, we convince by doing and sharing experiences. Like in the Bujaru's case, we started there without the mayors and without city councilors full support. So we asked for a vote of trust, and we saw the Citizen Assembly growing. And in the municipal elections right now, it became a topic of debate, became a topic of like the mayors were presenting as their political campaigns. So they saw the changes, they saw how is it mobilize the electors. So yeah, we convinced by doing and sharing experiences.
Speaking of doing, I'm going to now pass it to Amanda Luz, Dual Powered's Learning Programs Manager in Sao Paulo, to talk about how you can do the things we've been talking about today.
Yeah, so thanks, Josh. Thanks to the speakers. We heard from them that it takes consistent and very action-oriented work to be able to combine and try new approaches that can move our democracies forward. So I want to present 4 ways that we at People Powered with our partners can support you in taking this kind of action, including with digital platforms, legislative theater, assemblies, and other possibilities that were mentioned today in this discussion. So next slide, please. First, I want to invite you to apply to our accelerator programs right now. You can start as soon as you leave this webinar and follow the example of Delibera Brasil and Marcella with Bujaru that she presented to us today. They were part of the Climate Democracy Accelerator. We have an open call for applications until November 24th to support you in launching or expanding your participatory programs and thinking of new possibilities for your community. So I want you all to check this flowchart in the next slide to help you choose which kind of training fits your current needs. So the initial question is, do you want to help engage community members in government decision-making right now? If your answer is yes, so it means you're ready to launch or expand a project right now, we can move to the next steps in accelerator questions. But if your answer is no, perhaps because you still need to learn more about participatory democracy or understand more about community goals, also no worries, we have other opportunities for resources and courses that I'm going to present today. But going back to those who said yes, you're ready to develop an action plan, and we have a few options for you. With 2 of them, you develop a plan from the start. With the Climate Democracy Accelerator, you can plan how to address the climate crisis together with your community and government. Everyone from around the globe can apply as long as your project is about climate solutions. This program has funding support available up to $30,000. But if you want to launch a participatory or deliberative program in Europe, focused on current European democracy challenges and opportunities, then you apply to the Democratic Innovations Accelerator. We also have 2 other options for those who already have a plan in place, but need to improve or expand with a specific focus. So you can expand your program with a focus on the inclusion of marginalized communities with the Inclusive Democracy Accelerator. You plan new strategies such as combining methods to more effectively engage marginalized communities, especially women, youth, or displaced people. But if you need to improve how your democratic innovation becomes part of a long-term practices and laws in your government, then bring your program to the Mainstreaming Participation Accelerator. We're going to work with experts in legislation and other ways to institutionalize your innovation. I know this is a lot of information, but we will provide you with a link, and you can check more details on our website. But beyond differences in goals in audience, all the accelerators have the same training model and support that we have provided for more than 100 people around the world in the past 2 years. So for 6 months, you receive guided expert mentorship, global peer-to-peer learning, interactive resources, and self-paced training. Some programs, like I said, also have additional features such as grants for the Climate Democracy Accelerator and in-person workshops in Kenya for the mainstreaming participation and for the Inclusive Democracy Accelerator. So don't miss that opportunity. In the next slide, you can check the QR code or link to read more about each program and how to apply. There's a lot more information about these programs, but now I want to share other resources that we also have. And going back to the flowchart, the other opportunities for training resources that are free and available to you if the accelerators are not for you just yet. And next slide, we offer free one-on-one mentorship to you outside of the accelerator programs if you need to address specific challenges that just require some sessions with a mentor that have already worked on similar projects. Then the Rising Stars mentorship is for you. You can apply at any time on our website. Next slide, we also offer free self-paced courses that are open to you anytime, no need to apply for them, just create a login and that's it. We have courses that are introductory to participatory democracy, so you can learn more about the approaches that we talked today and also combine and use them in your context. And today I want to highlight very briefly our free and updated courses about digital participation. We know how technology can bring public participation to a new level, as Stefan was saying earlier. On these self-paced courses, you can assess your community needs and goals, then select, set up, and run a program with a digital participation platform. And while taking the courses, you also have the support of our interactive tool called Participation Playbook. And last but not least, last slide that I'm going to talk about how you can take action. If you work for the future of democracy around the world, you can apply to be a people-powered member. We have more than 100 members around the world. There are people and organizations that are together addressing common challenges, shifting power toward historically marginalized communities, and growing this global movement to expand people's democratic power. So join us. And that's it. Now I'll pass to Josh for the next steps and finishing up the event.
Great. Thank you so much. So again, please take those next steps, do what's right for you. We will send all this information out as well to everyone who registered. So apply for the accelerators, mentorship. You can take online courses, apply for people-powered membership. Next. And then you can also access some of the reports. So the report that Partners just released, Assemblies as a Tool for Just Democracy, that looks at people's movement assemblies and civic and citizens assemblies. Next. You can learn more about the approach in Bujaru, Brazil. Next. And then also the Forum Against Fakes. And we'd love to hear more of these experiences as well. So please share things that you are doing with us. We're here to connect all these different approaches and see how we can learn more and do more together. Next slide. And so we're also trying something a bit new this time with this automated captions. We'd love your feedback on this. So there should be a survey that appears after the webinar ends. If you could take just a minute to respond to these quick questions about the webinar and also how useful the translated captions were, that would be really helpful. And if you'd like other support for moving this work forward, or if you have other suggestions for us for future webinars that we can do around this. So thank you so much to all of the speakers, to Amanda and Stefan and Marcella and Kesi for sharing your experiences and the support, and also for being part of People Powered community. We're in this together. We want to support you. There's amazing work that you all can do together. So let us know how we can help. And thank you very much for joining today. And again, do the survey when we close this out. It's great seeing you all today.